How many of you will admit that you've looked up old friends on Facebook? It's a pretty neat aspect of Facebook. There's a lot going on with it now that I'm not a fan of, and I still look at it every once in a while. And just the other day, I was looking through a link that a friend had sent me that showed other friends, and I saw the girlfriend of one of my real close friends that I haven't seen or spoke to in 35 years. And I clicked on her link, whatever it is there, and up popped a picture of her and my buddy of 35 years ago together, which I'm assuming maybe they're married now. I don't know, but it's a neat thing that Facebook has in that manner of looking up old friends, and I'm trying to decide if I'm going to reach out and see if he wants to reconnect or whatnot. But we all have our childhood friends, and we all have friends as adults also, and we all have friends of some sort or some kind. I think as we get adults, we become so busy with our adult lives, our families, our jobs, our careers, um, and friends aren't the same as what they were when we were kids. But I'm sure some of you out there are still great friends with your best friend from school when you were young. Some friends are good, some friends are bad. The Bible tells us that friends are important. In fact, choosing our friends is important. Proverbs 12:26 says, "The righteous choose their friends carefully." We are to consider wisely who we choose for friends. What kinds of things are we to consider? Well, one, we have the need and the value of friends. It's definitely something that the Bible tells us. There's a need and there's a value in friendship. And then today we'll also look at what really is a friend, and then we'll look at some of the principles behind choosing a friend. The Bible indicates that there's a need for close friends and companionships. We need friends to relax. When it comes to relaxing and recreation from the routine and pressure of life. So we enjoy visiting with friends. And generally, those are people that we associate with that kind of get into the same things that we get into. So a lot of my friends are into camping and into mountain biking and into cars and I go do things with those friends and we enjoy our time relaxing and recreating together. And that's the easy, fun part of friendship. But we need the close association of others. God did not design us to be alone. And in fact, in Genesis 2:18, the Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone." And he goes on to say, "I will make a helper suitable for him." So, what's the value of not sharing experience? Everyone needs someone to share experience with. In Genesis 2:18, I want to focus more so on the part where it says the Lord God said it is not good for man to be alone. And we know the context of this is that he created Eve so that Adam could have an appropriate helper. And this is a scripture we go to for looking for a spouse and choosing a suitable mate of that nature. And this lesson is going to focus rather than on a spouse, it's more focusing on our friends, but it's still very applicable if you're searching for a spouse or of that age or whatever. All these things are applicable. Um, but I want to focus more on the idea of friendship. No one lives their lives solely for themselves. Sure, there's those that are selfish, and we do live in a me world where everyone is very self-centered and focused on themselves, but no one can truly joyfully live their lives solely to themselves. Romans 14:7 says, "For none of us lives for ourselves alone, and none of us die for ourselves alone." Now, the context, if you go to the next verse, I believe, uh, is definitely implying our relationship with Christ. And there's no better friend than Christ, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But it definitely indicates the concept that humans need association with others. There's the need for close friends because we need the love our friends have for us. Life is much more pleasant when we have those that care about us and care about our welfare. We need someone we know loves us no matter what comes, good times, bad times. And again, we get this type of love typically from our family, from our spouse, but Some of us have those wonderful friends that we have this type of companionship with also, this love that's unconditional, that our friends will stick by our sides through thick and thin. Proverbs 17:17 says, "A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity." So a true friend loves at all times, supports us even in times of trouble. And a true friend may be imposed upon. A true friend doesn't mind being approached and saying, "Hey, my friend, I have a problem. This is really bothering me. I need to talk to someone about it. I need to get it off my chest." True friends don't mind being imposed upon on something like that. And we've all heard of the term a fair-weathered friend. And this is exactly the opposite of that. I think we're more familiar for some reason with the idea of a fair-weathered friend than the idea of a true friend. We need someone to share our joy and happiness. And again, a lot of times this comes from a spouse or a family member. Um, but it's fun to talk to your friends about things that excite you, about things that have happened, certain events in our lives. Romans 12:15 says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn." And for some reason, I just can't help but think about weddings and funerals. Um, but what a time of support that is for our two friends. The ideas of weddings, because we just went through one a year or so ago, and it's kind of different than it was when I got, 20 years ago. It was like, you'd have a wedding of 300 people and all the parents, friends, and everyone you knew were there. And things have kind of changed. Times have changed. Weddings are usually more smaller, but it was always a time of bringing your friends together and celebrating in that joyous occasion. And then you have the opposite of that, of funerals. And unfortunately, in my life now, I seem to be going to more funerals than weddings. Um, but you go there to show your support for your friends and the loss of their loved ones. And so we rejoice with those who rejoice, and we mourn with those who mourn. Um, but if you think about what makes us rejoice, what truly for a Christian is ultimate joy and happiness? Is it not salvation? Is it not the very idea that through the blood of Christ and through salvation and baptism that we're saved from this world of sin? So when we share with our friends our joy and happiness, do we share that with our friends? It's a question to ponder. We need someone to help us when we need cheering. Proverbs 27:9 says, "Perfume and incense bring joy to the heart, and the pleasantness of a friend springs from the heartfelt or from their heartfelt advice." So it's not just through the good times and the laughter and the recreation part, the fun part, but a good friend is able to also be there to support us and to provide sound advice and counsel. A true friend knows us well enough that they can provide us with that. They know our inner being, and they know, what, I don't want to say what our thoughts are, but they know us well enough to be able to say, "Hey, here's what you need to do. Here's my opinion." They're able to give us truthful advice and not just fill our ears with what we want to hear or what the easy answer is. So what is a friend? Well, in simplistic terms, Webster's dictionary says a friend is a person who has a real liking for and a confidence in another person. Now, if we go to the context of the Bible, then uh, the Greek word that is used for friendship is philia, and it comes from uh, the word of love, philaios. And there's different words for the word of love, but it comes from that of philaios, which is love, of a brotherly love. And for some reason, for me, when I think of the different, you got agape, eros, and phileos, and I think of the city of Philadelphia because it is the city of brotherly love. And that term of love is what the word philia was, the Greek word for friendship was based on. If we look at some Bible examples of friendship, then we can't help but think about Jonathan and David. And I like putting these goofy little pictures up here of little kids' books. I don't know why. It's lighthearted, I guess. But if we think of biblical examples of friendship, we almost automatically go to David and Jonathan. And throughout 1 Samuel, it starts about in chapter 18, and I have verse 1 and 2 up here. It says, after David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him, and he did not let him return to his family. And if you go to the next verse, they even went so far as to make a covenant. Jonathan, I believe, gave David his armor and his bow, and Jonathan stuck with David through thick and thin. And we know that Jonathan was Saul's son, and we know that Saul eventually became infatuated with killing David. And at that point, Jonathan stayed loyal to David. He even tried to reconcile the two, and he defended David to Saul. But Saul had gone too much off the deep end, and Jonathan stayed loyal to David, keeping him appraised of where Saul was and whether Saul was searching for him. And he was true to him until their last meeting in Horish. And later, right after that, Jonathan was killed in battle. But what a great example of true friendship right there between David and Jonathan. We can also look at Paul and Timothy. And in 1 Timothy 1, 3 through 5, it says, I thank God, whom I serve as my ancestors did, with a clear conscience, as night and day. I constantly remember you in my prayers, recalling your tears. I long to see you so that I may be filled with joy. I'm reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I'm persuaded now lives in you. So Paul first met Timothy at Lystra on Paul's second missionary journey. And in fact, when Paul moved on from that area, Timothy actually went with Paul on the rest of the journey. And Timothy served Paul in Ephesus, and he was with him during his imprisonment in Rome. And then the two grew so close that the apostle considered him, and I believe if you look at the first verse of 1 Timothy 1, Paul considered Timothy a true son in the faith. And another wonderful example of Christian friendship. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning that there's good friends and there's bad friends. And good friends are not just good to us, but good for us. It's a positive relationship, supportive. A good friend will be morale building instead of tearing us down. And in fact, if you find yourself in a relationship with a friend that constantly belittles you and gets you into trouble or just seems to be a negative association, that person probably is not a true friend. And maybe that relationship needs to be evaluated. But the most important thing is we must not choose friends that lead us astray. And a good example of that is the story of Amnon and Jonadab. And we find that in 2 Samuel 13, 1 through 14. And it's a rather gruesome, brutal story. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I do want to put the part up here about the relationship between Amnon and Jonadab. So Amnon had an advisor named Jonadab, son of Shimeah, David's brother. Jonadab was a very shrewd man. He asked Amnon, why do you, the king's son, look so haggard, morning after morning? Won't you tell me? Amnon said to him, I am in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. Go to bed and pretend to be ill, Jonadab said. When your father comes to see you, say to him, I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in my sight, so I may watch her and then eat it from her hand. And the story goes on, and I think we're familiar with it, but Amnon goes on to rape his half-sister Tamar, and it is a terrible story. But Amnon felt confident enough in Jonadab, his advisor, his confidant, his friend. He felt confident enough in him to disclose something very private. And then look what Jonadab does to Amnon. He leads him astray, down a very dark path. It's a good example of bad friendship. What about our children's friends? That's a scary situation, especially nowadays with the internet, and I'm dating myself and probably am not cool because I'm going to say FaceTime. I don't even know if kids know what FaceTime is. There's so many programs out there where a kid could get online visually and chat face to face with someone through a computer screen halfway across the world. Now, ideally, and in the past, we've always had our children's friends come to our house, or I go to their house, I meet their parents and whatnot, and I'm comfortable with that. But nowadays, with COVID and quarantining and having to be inside and no school, um, children are expanding their social network by doing this stuff, and it's scary. And as parents with young children, um, it's something we really have to talk to our children about and make them aware of bad influences and bad friends. So some guidelines in choosing our friends. We have to choose carefully. And this is kind of how I started this lesson off. And I started it off with Proverbs 12:26. It says, "The righteous choose their friends carefully, but the way of the wicked leads them astray." Now, the NIV is very simplistic. Let me read the King James Version. It says, "The righteous is more excellent than his neighbor, but the way of the wicked seduces them." Now, that statement almost sounds like a pompous statement, like, I am more righteous than thy neighbor. That's not the context that we're looking on. It's advice on association. It's telling us to be an example to those that are not righteous, to live our lives as an example so that the unrighteous can see what a righteous person lives their life like. And then it's also indicating that it's better to choose a friend that is righteous than one who is wicked. A righteous friend will guide us in what is right and what is morally correct, whereas a wicked friend drifts hopelessly astray, and they will not give us proper guidance. A good example of what we just talked about in Jonadab. Now, did anyone remember the guy named Don Johnson from Miami Vice? Okay, not a hero of mine, nothing like that. I just came across this story and it was very applicable to this next point I want to make. So in the late 70s and early 80s, Don Johnson was famous from the show Miami Vice, and he was very heavy into cocaine, alcohol, and he was always in the news for wrecking very expensive cars. And in 1983, he went to rehab and he turned his life around. And when he came out of rehab, a reporter approached him and asked him if he had any regrets. And his comment was, "Yeah, I regret spending 10 years with a group of people I wouldn't spend 10 minutes with now." Now let's look at 1 Corinthians 15:33. "Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character." So if we're with non-Christian friends, do we conform or do we stand our ground in our Christian values? Do our non-Christian friends, do they know we're Christians? Do they respect that of us? Do they act accordingly when they're uh, with a Christian? Um, so that's something that we should think about: is how is our interaction with our non-Christian friends? And we cannot let bad company corrupt good character. Another humanistic nature is to strive for acceptance and popularity. And this is especially stronger in our teens and late teens and early adulthood. As we grow older, I'm so old now, I don't care what anybody thinks about me. I'm not trying to be popular. Yeah, it's nice to be accepted, but those things don't matter much to me anymore as they did when I was a kid. Let's look at Matthew 16:26. It says, "What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul?" So people do struggle with that idea of being accepted. And when we're with our non-Christian friends, we want to be accepted. And how do we, how much do we succumb to the temptation that is there, just to be accepted by that group? So it's better to have just a few of the right kind of friends than to have a multitude of the kind of friends that could cause us to lose our soul. So when choosing a friend, we want to choose a friend who will be a good example. A good example to you and a good example to others. Now, I'm adventurous, so I have some friends that I hang around with, and we do sort of crazy stuff. We're all getting old, so the craziness has calmed down much. But we're going off of bike jumps and down crazy hills. And just a couple weekends ago, I went out with some friends and we went camping, which is one of the things I like to do. And we went on side by sides and dirt bikes and quads, and I had the opportunity to participate in that, and it was fun. But then when you all get together, we all joke around. It's like, oh yeah, that don't go up that like old so and so did, or yeah, if you're going down, you know, Death Ravine, be sure you don't do like so and so did. And we joke around. And remember, I'm talking about recreation, the fun stuff. But on a more serious level of that, let's look at 1 Peter 2:21 and 1 Corinthians 11:1. 1 Peter 2:21 says, "To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps." And then in 1 Corinthians 11:1 it says, "Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ." So we see the importance of being an example, but more so, what is that example based on? The example is based upon the example that Christ set forth for us. Choose a friend who is modest. 1 Timothy 2:9 says, "I also want the women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes." The idea here is not flashy, not demanding attention, not requiring that they be in the limelight and in the focus. Um, when I talk to people about interviewing techniques and whatnot, and ideas of how to go to an interview, I always tell them, hey, this isn't the time that, since you're not in uniform, to go in there all flashy with your gold chains and your jewelry hanging, and guys with your one stud earring and stuff. It's dress conservatively, professionally, and appropriate, because don't go in there being all flashy. And the idea here is you don't want someone that it's part of that me, look at me. Uh, we not being in the limelight. Now that's what this verse is focusing on here. Don't demand attention. We also should choose a friend who has good morals. And this simply just takes us right back to a verse we've already talked about, 1 Corinthians 15:33. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. Choose a friend who can bridle the tongue. James 1:26 says, "Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongue deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless." So religion should produce an effect on our whole conduct. How good is a person that professes to be a Christian but speaks mean, hateful, deceitful, crude things? And in fact, in James, a little further on in the 3rd chapter, verse 8, James even goes so far as to describe the tongue is full of poison. And it's one of the worst ways to hurt people, by the things we say. We don't want a friend that says hurtful things to people. And we need to watch our association with that. And I envision the workplace and around the water cooler in the morning on Monday morning, and so is called in sick again. We're all gathered around there talking about so and how lazy and worthless they are. They don't do their work. Yeah, you know what? I've got to do that person's work because they called in sick today. And do you find yourself caught up in that? Or do you find yourself associated with people that are caught up in that? Or do you work with other people that profess to be Christians as well, and they're the ringleader of that type of talk? Um, Association with that type of talk and those things, those hurtful things of the tongue is negative, and we need to stay away from it. We need to choose a friend who is honest, or more so pure in heart. If we look at Luke chapter 8, and in particular, this is the parable of the sower and the seed, and we focus on the soil, the seed that fell on the good soil. In verse 8:15, it says, "But that on the good ground are they which in an honest and good heart, having heard the word, keep it and bring forth fruit with patience." So not those that fell by the wayside that are easily tempted and led astray, not those that fell on the rock that have no roots, not those among the thorns that are easily corrupted by the ways of the world, but those on the good soil, that are honest and true to the Word of God, and it can be seen in their works. We want to choose a friend who will tell you the truth. Proverbs 27:5-6 says, "Better is open rebuke than hidden love. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses." So, a good friend is able to honestly confront you when you are astray, and to tell you the truth, even if the truth hurts. But ultimately, we must choose a friend who has respect for God and regards to spiritual things more than worldly things. And there's a lot of scriptures we can look at in the Bible that focuses on this, and I was drawn to Matthew chapter 6, and you can kind of read that whole chapter, and those are all key things that if your friend has these attitudes and these types of behaviors, that's a good friend. But I focused on a couple of maybe 3 verses here. Matthew 6:24 says, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." Verse 25 says, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes?" And then verse 33, the one that really says it all. "But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." So we need a friend that is not worldly focused. We need a friend that values God and has a relationship with God, because that's a friend that can travel with us down this narrow path that we've been talking about on the series of lessons. So I want to conclude with 2 points. And the first point I want to bring up, I've mentioned already. And this class, when I first started it, was more designed to have some discussion going on. And this would have been a good discussion point. But do we tell our non-Christian friends about the gospel? Which leads to a question. Can a Christian have non-Christian friends? I believe we all do, and I believe that's okay. But does a non-Christian friend meet the guidelines that we just discussed? But then also think about this. If we value our non-Christian friends, have we talked to them about the gospel of Christ? And we know the gospel call from Mark 16:15. "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation." And if we have a love and a value for our friends that aren't necessarily Christians, do we do this? Do we tell them about the gospel? And I'll be the first to raise my hand and say, hey, it's difficult. I've known this guy for 30 years, and he's not a Christian. And usually most of my friends that I've known that long realize now that, yes, I'm a Christian, and I go to church. And if they have some kind of religious types of questions, they'll come and approach me about it. But it's hard and difficult to sit down with that person and have a true Bible study. And maybe that's a problem I have. It is. But I think other people struggle with that too. It's difficult. And I could go on to a whole other series of lessons about this, and maybe personally that's what I need to do. But simply we have the Holy Spirit to guide us. We have all the tools. So if we value the friendship of our, quote, non-Christian friends, then why have we not told them about the gospel? The next point I want to make is that our best friend is Jesus. And I have John 15:14-17 here, kind of Jesus' last discourse here to his disciples on that night before he was betrayed. And he says here in John 15, he says, "You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command, love each other." So it ties right into what I was just talking about with our friends, our non-Christian friends. We've been given every tool that we need. Do we share that with them? And then the point I really wanted to draw from this is that when we talk about friends, There's no better example than Christ. And I appreciate the time you've given to watch this video, and thank you, and see you again next week.